Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the talk. Right, I hope all of you are doing well. Okay, so hello, everyone. Welcome to the Philo online talk session, Phantomopolis, okay, toward Asian arts futurism. I'm the guest host today. I will be moderating the talk. My name is Yap Selvin. Thank you very much for to all of you, and I can see some faces and friends from KL and from other places. Right, good to see you. A very brief introduction of myself. Right, so I teach at the Faculty of Creative Multimedia University in Cyberjaya, Malaysia, and it's also a member of Rumah Panas, an artist collective initiative based in Kuala Lumpur. We started in early 2000. Okay, right now all our members are involved in different arts and curatorial practices in KL. So basically, my job today is to welcome everyone to talk about this very important, interesting event. Okay, so Philo is a series of salon talk revolving the discussion of philosophies and humanities, and look into the practice and exchange of art and cultural exchange platform between Taiwan and Malaysia. And it's actually organized by the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Malaysia, and produced by the INSO Arts and Culture Foundation. So thank you very much to the Taipei Economic and Culture Office, and as well as the great team of INSO Foundation behind and doing all this important work for us so that we can meet up here. So before we get started, let's welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Nobuo Takamori-san.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, right. I know Nobuo since 2012, so it has been a 10 years journey together. And it's interesting to finally again have him here in a sense, or virtually in the KL platform to talk about what he has been doing. So Takamori-san is a Taiwanese independent curator with a Japanese descent. All right, he is currently based in Taipei and also the assistant professor at the Taipei National University of Arts. And I know that he's also teaching at different universities as well. So wide experience, all right, looking into art history, contemporary practice, bringing from the lens from different ways of thinking about or talking about visual culture, talking about contemporary art practice and digital practice. So for more than a decade, Nobuo's curatorial work and research project aims to evoke the hidden language between Taiwan and Southeast Asia. And I would insist that it's actually beyond Southeast Asia, that I'm aware that he has been doing research in Mongolia, in Central Asia, and also with colleagues in India, Bangladesh as well, and in West Africa. And I'm aware that he has also done projects in Mexico. Right? I used to listen to his stories about how to install an exhibition in Mexico and all the challenges. So those are actually interesting things that would bring, I think, into his presentation today, because it's all about practical exchange project which encourage and engage interaction of contemporary arts from different sites. I believe it's not just Taiwan and Southeast Asia, but also different type of regions and different communities. Okay, so some of Nobuo's important or noted projects include the Taiwan International Video Exhibition in 2014, The Return of Ghosts at Fengjia Museum, or Hong'a Museum in Taipei, and The Secret South, from Co-War Perspective to Global South in Museum Collection, which was held at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum in 2020. Okay, so these are all very interesting experience, and I want to highlight that when I first met Nobuo is actually, as I said, in 2012, and then he came as part of the curatorial outfit Outsiders Factory, and we invited him. RIP invited him to give a talk and in KL. So he was actually introducing modern and contemporary arts from Taiwan, and some of the issues and challenges, how it could actually be reflected from the lens of not only history, but also identity politics and cultural politics, and in a way, I suppose, to the contemporary geo-cultural politics, the struggles in the sense of thinking about indigeneity, nationhood, country, and colonial and post-colonial history in that sense. And those are very interesting events that he has shared with us, and I wish I could show that, but I think we need to move on very fast. And then in 2013, you actually invited me to go to Taiwan, and as part of your project as a guest editor for Art Critique, actually important arts journal coming from Tainan University of Arts. And 2014, when some of my colleagues were actually going to Taipei, and we in a sense, we co-organized together with Outside the Factory to do a talk at the Taipei Fine Art Museum. So that include artists Pon Tai Ming, Chong Kim Chiu, Liu Tek Leong, and two actually Malaysian artists who are based in Taipei now, OCV Ao Yi and Yao Chi Hao. And then I think OCV, for example, is actually very active and very well presented and participating in a lot of international biennale as well as in Taiwan. So perhaps before, I think we have 2 minutes in the sense that we're going to start soon. So I think I want to highlight this point because I think it's important to think about the topic that Nobuo is going to talk about, which is related to the Asian Art Biennale, which he co-curated by 4 other very interesting curators from the Philippines, Thailand, and from India. I think these are, and one of his colleagues from Taiwan, and talking about the issues of what exactly is Asian futurism, but the topic is actually Asian art futurism. So what is the difference between Asian futurism, Asian art futurism? And I'm also interested to know, in the sense that this journeys that Nobuo has taken more than 10 years, that I was aware that you were actually with Outside the Factory, you were doing exchange, visit, hosting artists, and bringing artists to go to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to the Philippines, and as well as in Malaysia. So how does all this knowledge, this journey accumulate and come together and become part of or contribute, right, to the formation, to the thinking about the theme in this Biennale, okay, which is Phantasma Polis, all right? So without further ado, and if I can have the cue from the Philo team from INSO, I think if we are good, should we start? Or maybe Nobuo, do you feel like you want to warm up?
Yeah, I think I can warm up now. And very thanks the introduction from Solving. Especially you mentioned things happened decades ago, which already allows my nostalgia on Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, and I am very happy to be in Kuala Lumpur again, but actually it's virtually, but not my spirit is it's Carol tonight. So before I start, I would like to thanks to INSO Foundation and also Taipei office in Kuala Lumpur. And let me share my screen first. Okay. Right. So I think everybody can see it clearly about my presentation. So today I would like to talk about the Phantasma Polis. And in fact, Phantasma Polis is the title of Asian Art Biennial 2021, which I curated last year, and I co-curate with other 4 curators for this biennial. And this biennial was organized by National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts in Taichung. And the biennial originally was designed to encourages the audience from Taiwan can starting to notice about the dynamic works from different parts of Asia. And I think this edition is the 5th or 6th edition of the Asian Art Biennial. Okay, so today's my presentation will divide into 2 parts. The first part we're talking about the idea and concept of the Phantasma Polis, and the second part I will go through the exhibition views and also the works from the biennial. and the ideas to represent this biennial again is because the last year is the peak of the pandemic globally. So although we spent a lot of resources and a lot of works on creating this biennials, but unfortunately, that's we can't have chance to welcome lots of the visitors from outside of Taiwan. Okay, so the first questions about the Asian Art Biennial 2021 is that because we focus on Asian futurism, and when people hear the terms futurism, I think the first terms come up in the mind will be about the science fiction. So in fact, it's the most beginning part of the process of the workings in the biennials. When we starting to initiate the entire project, the first things come up to my mind is that I want to working on some things about future. And one of the reasons is that because the last decades, especially in the art scenes of the Southeast Asian, we're talking a lot about the hidden histories, the connections in the historical narrative. So this kind of narratives reflect the histories already became kind of a mainstream in the Southeast Asians contemporary art scene, especially the art scenes which making its hub at Singapore. Yeah, so somehow I feel that kind of a discussion is already too much. So I want to making something new and want to making something change. And I just find out that when we're talking about the Southeast Asia or Asia, it's quite rare that the people will directly connect Asia to the future, because in most of the viewpoint, especially the viewpoint from the Western world, the people will think that Asians belong to something tradition, something from ancient. So I starting to discuss it with the curatorial teams of the Asian Art Biennials, and we are all agreed that we can doing something about the future or doing something about the science fiction. But the most interesting thing is that some of the curators from our teams, they say in fact Asia or the Asian people, they already have their own science fiction. For example, we have Ramayana from the Indian mythology. We have Shangri-La from Tibet. We have Tao Huayuan from Chinese folklore, and also Urashima Taro or Momotaro from Japanese folklore story. But I am thinking about what's different between this Asian mythology or folklore with the science fiction, and why we don't say this. We don't define this mythology as science fiction, and I think the answer is because when we're talking about the science fictions, it's something based on the progressive narrative of techno modernization. The idea of the techno modernization is that the trends will the technical environments or the technical backgrounds will progressive or will improve regarding to the process of the times, which means when the time move on, the techno part of the world will also begin to improve. So basically, this kind of ideas is also so-called as the modernizations under the Western perspective. So until the early 20th centuries, Asia or other parts of the world, which means the world outside of the Western world, which has been defined exceptional rates of the techno modernization. So according to these ideas, the world outside of the Western world, they are the learners, they are the receivers, they are the later comers of the techno modernization. They are the students who starting to learning the new technique, and they are not the inventor, they are not the creators of the techno modernization. But something has been changed after the wars. After the 1970s, this narrative became paradoxical, as Asia is not only studied out its economical booming, but also developed its own high-tech culture regarding to its societies. And the first example is the development of Japan. So the photo we saw is the 1964, the first high-speed rail trains, which has been adopted and practical using in the mass transportation systems. So which we can say it's the first high-speed trains systems has been introduced in Asia instead of Europe or North America, and of course is a kind of Asian technology. So after the 1964, first is the Japan, and then the four Asian tigers we call the South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And after 2000, we have kind of economical boomings in China, and now is the age of the Southeast Asia, and also for the age of the India. So this kind of economical and the technical development have been causing kind of a cultural paradoxical issues regarding to the techno modernizations. So to deal with this kind of paradox of worldview, Hollywood films starting to introduce its techno-orientalism. So, for example, when we saw the 1982 films Blade Runner, in Blade Runner, it has been represented Asia as kind of a high-tech world, but with a very low life quality. So in the Blade Runner, in fact, they set the backgrounds in the Los Angeles in the 2020s. But in their perspective, the Los Angeles in the 2020s has been already occupied by the Asian peoples. There's full of the immigrant and everybody eats noodles, and the waiter is just like the Kuala Lumpur today. So although the people enjoy it very high tech, but the quality of the life is very low. So the street always crowded, and there's always trash on the streets, and there's always some writings, characters you can't read, prints on the walls. So this kind of techno-orientalism also reflect the Japanese phobia, which means kind of afraid of the Japan's in the 1980s Hollywood. Because in the 1980s, Japan already got its economical peak, and during the 1980s, even I think most of the people, they have been thinks that the economy of the Japan's will overcomes the United States, and the people are very positive about the growing of the Japanese economy, and they say the Japan's were buying everything in the United States one day. So in the 1980s, the people on the one hand, they are notice about the techno development and the economical development of Japan, but on the other hand, they are afraid about this reality. So so they starting to think about if in the future will be dominated by the Asian people, the Asian cultures. This kind of futures, although we can't deny it will be high-tech futures, but it will be kind of a dystopia. It will be the futures that don't care about the individual rights, the future that will not take care about the qualities of individuals. So this kind of so-called the Japanophobia after 2000 have been transformed into xenophobia. Yeah, so today we were talking about the United States or the Westerner. They were afraid of the Chinese because China has been growing. In fact, this kind of cultural phenomenon has been happened in 1980s, and I think maybe in the 2030 or 2040, people were talking about India phobia, maybe, yeah, because we all know that the India maybe will become the next superpower in Asia. Yeah, so this kind of so-called the high-tech, low-life future science fiction films has become a kind of element of the dream films of the cyberpunk. So somehow the cyberpunk in fact uses Asian cities as a stage, and also they try to orientalize the Asian bodies which are under the techno background, and we always think that this kind of orientalized perspective is only happened in the commercial films, like the evil American films from the Hollywood. But in fact, even the artistic director, they also have this kind of perspective. For example, the 1985 documentary, which shot by Wim Wenders, one of the most iconic film directors in Europe, and in these films, Tokyo Ga, you will feel that, in fact, the Wim Wenders, he used kind of a cyberpunk perspective to reconstruct it, the imagined Tokyo. So somehow, when the Westerners they visit Tokyo or visit Japan after the 1980s, they were always talking about the nostalgia of a kind of a modernized Japan, which is more natural, which the Japanese has been harmonious, live with the natural environment. And in the ancient times, the Japanese, they will not go to the pachinko store, they will not go to karaoke, and there's no too much cars or neon signboards on the street. So this kind of nostalgia, they are memorize the classical Japanese culture, but on the other hand, they are not satisfied about the real Japan today, which is already modernized and contemporized with a lot of the techno applications, and which the technical application also has its own roots, its own culture. Yeah. So when we observed the Western films or the Hollywood films, we will find out that the future world with Asia or with the Asian people, it's always depicted as the dystopia. But the future world without Asia or Asian people or Asian culture, it will always be elegant. The people will always wearing suits, and they will always living in the big house. And although there's troubles in the utopia, but at least it will look like the utopia. There will not be a lot of the people crowding on the street and waiting on the line for a bowl of the noodle. So So somehow, under the Western perspective, they try to depict the future world, which is perfect and elegant without the influence of Asia. But of course, I not only try to criticize the Western world when I start to studying or researching about how the Asians' perspective on the future. I also find out this kind of a dark side of the Asian modern culture. For example, when the Asian theorists or the Asian politicians, when they are thinking about or when they are trying to imagine about the future, they were always talking about the war. In the 1940s, one of the Japanese general, Ishiwara Kanji, he published a war theory, a book called Final War Theory. And in his imaginations, that in the future, there will be a big war between the West and East, and we can't escape from that. So the Asian people will finally walk into the battles with the Western world, and we will want it's the end because Asian people are better or something. And when I starting to researching this kind of material, I find out in the modern China, for example, in the 1999, there's publishing a book called Unrestricted Warfare by the People Liberation Army, 超限战. Okay, so this book, in fact, is kind of a copy from Final War theories. They're talking about the same ideas that in the future we must need to war, engage in the world with the Westerns, and so we need to use any kind of the method. So somehow I feel that when we're talking about the Asian futurism, we can't only stick on criticize the Western perspective, but we are also need to mention that what happens in our future perspective. I mean the future perspective from the Asian parts. But according to, I mean, from my personal perspective, I think if we will to discuss it more on this topic, then we can avoid lots of trap, which already been published or discussed before. So the last reasons which I am interested about the futurism is because I starting to working on a field trip in Africa regions, the African regions. And we all know in the African contemporary arts, the Afrofuturism is kind of the mainstream from the 1990s. So I am very curious and wondering about how the Africans art scenes they are thinking about the Afrofuturism. So in fact, one of the starting points is that how could we compare with the Afrofuturism, and why there is no discussion about the Asian futurism. So it's a quote from Kenyan a Kenyan writer called Enos Yamo, and one of his points that he said, if Afrofuturism exists, then Eurofuturism must also be defined. Because in the context of the Afrofuturism, they think the Afrofuturism is kind of exotical perspective which created by the European curator. So somehow, in fact, in today, the African art scenes, they try to escape from the concept of the Afrofuturism. So they're talking about kind of a comparison between the Euro and Afro. But when I read this sentence, what comes out to my mind is that So what is the Asian futurism and why we don't discuss its Asian futurism? And why when the people talking about the comparison between the African and Europeans, so what is the position of the Asians? Why we are already being accept from this discussion? So I am bringing these questions in my mind and starting to developing this biennial. And the title of the biennial, in fact, has been inspired by novels which written by Taiwanese architect Wang Dahong. And Wang Dahong, he stopped to creating architectural work since the 1970s because the White Terror and martial law period in Taiwan. So he's starting to spend several decades to writing sci-fi novels, and which has been written by English. And in these novels, it's talking about a story of a prince which lived in the year 3000, and he's starting to travel across interstellar. And the title of the novel has been called Phantasmagoria. So Phantasmagoria is a term from the 19th century, and this term has been depict kind of ghost house or the amazing house which use the technique of the illusions like mirrors or the lights to scare the visitors. So so it's kind of an idea about the phantoms, fantastic or the illusions. So basic on the ideas of the Phantasmagoria written by Wang Dahong, we're starting to creating a new term, which in fact is the Greek term. So the title Phantasmaporis, phantasmas means the phantom or the ghostly, and the polis, like the metropolis, is the Greek terms as the city or the big cities or the city-state. So we combine these two terms and make the titles as the Phantasmaporis. So in this biennial, we try to talking about the Asian contemporary 90s, and we think this kind of contemporary 90s the locations where utopias and dystopias intersect. In a certain conjoined forms, Asian contemporary 90s organically connects the past with the future, the exotic with the technical, the illusionary with realities, and the myth with the glorious. Right, so before I move into the second part, maybe we can show in videos to welcome our visitor to visit the Phantasmaporis.
各位女士先生，欢迎来到 Phantasmapolis 未至之城。这是一座过去只存在于未来，现在尚未到来，而未来早已抵达的城邦国家。想要入境的旅客，请遵守我邦疾管中心的规定，确实依据公共卫生规范向检疫站办理入境手续。已经入境的旅客也请尊重我邦之文化，无论是看到太香的、太离奇的、太难为情的东西，都是未来世界十分自然的日常生活。Phantasmapolis 未知之城城邦政府关心您的健康，并诚挚欢迎您的莅临。
So that's kind of a welcome videos for our visitors. Yeah, because we imagine we are kind of an independent state in this phantasmagories. So basically, it's biennial, which opens it's the last year since October to the March of this year. And one of the most interesting things is that this biennial is curated by curatorial teams and including me and colleague from Taiwan, Koho Yukwan, and also Tessa Maria Quazon from Philippines, and Anushka Rajendran from India, and Tanavi Chopratit from Thailand. So basically, it's kind of international teams that we try to discuss the Asian futurism in very different perspective. And in Phantasmagories, we divide the topic into 6 major topics, including the Asian sci-fi and cosmos, the exports cemeteries in Osaka, the Asian megacities and pandemic and apocalypse and technical ruins and queer sci-fi. And I might not able to introduce I mean the entire sections of the biennial. And another point I want to mention is that although we divide the biennials into 6 different topics, but in fact, if you has been visited the exhibition space, then you will find out that we will try to mix things, the narrative together. So which means maybe the work which related to the megacity will just juxtapose it besides the pandemic and on another neighboring space we're showing the work which related to cosmos or sci-fi. So we try to creating kind of a mixing narrative, and in fact in the exhibitions rooms, the audience will not be noticed about which works will belong to which topic. So we encourage that the audience will use their own feelings to experience the narratives from the works. So our first topic is about the Asian sci-fi and cosmos. We also try to use the historical perspective to talking about the sci-fi and cosmos. So although we are talking about the future, but which didn't mean we only invited the work from today or the work with kind of a futuristic high-tech technology. And in fact, in these biennials, we try to including a lot of historical masterpieces from different countries. And one of the reasons that we are not only try to present a kind of a perspective of the future from the contemporary art to date, but also try to enlist the perspective of imagination about the futures from the different generations. So I think this kind of historical perspective is very important because it can make us understanding about what happens in the past and how the artists from the past generations imagines about the future. So the first piece is, in fact, is also the most earliest pieces in these biennials, which we borrowed animations from Japan, dated it's the 1933 by Okino Shigeji. So the Okino's work, the title is A Day After 100 Years. It's a silent black and white independent animation. And this film is very interesting because in this film, Okino, he said he will die in a great war in the 1940s. So it's a very interesting since that he has kind of a version about what will be really happens in the 1940s. So after he died in that Great War, his spirit travels to the futures in the 2033, and at the futures he made his grandsons. So his grandsons bring him to visit the Tokyo in the future, and in the future the Tokyo city already changed the names, and at the end they travel to the Mars. So it's a very crazy fantasies about the future, and one of the most interesting things is that um, unlike the Western sci-fi film at the same time, like the Metropolis from Germany, this film has a very strong concept about the dying spirit, and which is also talking about the concepts about the Buddhism. Yeah, so I think it's also causing kind of the different perspective uh, from uh, which aparts this film from the Western dream film. And in this biennials, we also showing the laser photographies of Yu Yu Yang Yingfeng from the 1980s. So the people always mentioned Yu Yu Yang as kind of a famous sculptor, but in fact, he's the first multimedia artist in Taiwan, and he started to introduce the laser art in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So for me, these work are very progressive and very dynamic. But the problem is that because I think it's not only the problems of Yu Yu Yang or Taiwanese artists, but it's kind of a common problem for the Asian artists is that although they have a very strong version about the future, and also they're creating a very strong expressions of the artistic materialize it, but they're always facing a kind of art things which is more conservative compared with the European art scenes. So there are very rare people they have been noticed. Yu Yu Yang has this kind of a work. So when we exhibit this series in the museums, the audience they are very surprised. They even don't think they even don't know that Yu Yu Yang has a very strong kind of progressive or kind of a modern or contemporary side of his creation. And in this project, we also try to discussing about Yu Yang's landscape architecture project in Saudi Arabia in 1970s. Of course, the background is about the diplomatic relationship between Arabian country and Taiwan in the 1970s under the context of the Cold War. But I think if we just ignore the backgrounds and think about and looking on the sketch or the draft from the Yu Yang, then we will find out it's a very interesting because he used kind of the ideas to modernizing the concrete wall and use this kind of concrete walls, the elements, to construct the entire space of the park. And in his versions, I think this kind of design, which combines the elements from the Chinese modernism, but also we can feel that the Yu Yu Yang has been observing and researching on the Arabic classical architecture. So somehow I can feel this kind of architecture showing a very strong ambitious and versions on how the utopia of the future Asians should look like. But unfortunately, this park has no chance to building out regarding to the resources, lacking of the resources, and also the changing situation of the diplomatic. So so in this biennial, we try to introduce some important modern masterpiece, for example, from the ink painting from the Liu Guosong since 1960s. He might be the first artist the first Chinese ink artist starting to paintings on the scenes of the universe. And if we regarding the 1960s is also the times that the United States starting to landings on the moon, then we can understand this kind of context is not only relating to the classical Chinese nostalgia, but also kind of a very futuristic perspective towards the space. So we are also try to introduce the contemporary artists and juxtapose their work with the modern icons. For example, Chinese artist He Kunlin, in fact, he has been inspired by Liu Guosong's work. So his work is talking about how the people landing on the moons and how the tourists visit the moons in 2092. And at the same areas, we also exhibit the documents by Wang Dahong, the architect, which inspired our title. So this document is about a monument called Serenade. So a Serenade is a monument of celebrating the human landings on the moon, and it was prepared as kind of the gift from Republic of China to United States. But because the changings of the diplomatic situation, so this monument became kind of an unfinished project. So so drawings the entire exhibition, we are also trying to including this kind of documents sections to allow the people's interested on some of the important issue. Okay, so this is the poster of the Serenade monument if it could be finished. And at the same time, just besides the Wang Dahong's Serenade monument documents, we also introducing the Malaysian artist Tan Zi Hao's work. So Tan Zi Hao's work is also about monuments, and the title is Monuments to the Dust We Became. But the most interesting thing is not the monument about the cosmos, which is a very mega scaled space, but it's a very micro scaled idea about the monument, because the monument said by the Tan Zi Hao, in fact, is the case or the cocoons from the one of the insect called household case bearer. So the household case bearers, they were collecting the human hair or the dust or the dust from the house and make it become kind of the case. So Tan Zi Hao collecting this case from Malaysia and transported very carefully to Taiwan, and we installing a kind of a microscope to allow the audience to observe this case. And of course, we also have other artists. Their paintings is trying to talking about the ideas of time or the space. Excuse me. So, so now we move on into the second chapter, which calls the Explore 1970s in Osaka. And why the Osaka 70 is very important is because it's the first international export hosted in Asia, and in the 1970s, it's also a very crucial time that the participated Asian countries they also try to show in their perspective about the future. So here I find out the documents about the Pavilion of Malaysia in 1970 in the export, but in the Phantasmapolis, we try to focus on the Pavilion of the Republic of China. So why the Pavilion of the Republic of China is important in the 1970s for Taiwanese? Because it's the last time that Taiwan participates the international exports under the name of the name of the Republic of China, 中华民国, and the next time Taiwan could participate international expo is Shanghai Expo. But after Shanghai, until now, we still don't have chance to enter the main expo and buildings, the national pavilions inside the expo until today. So it became a kind of a very important memory for Taiwanese people and about how we think about the future. For example, the pavilion's architecture, in fact, was built by famous Chinese descent American architect I.M. Pei Ryming. So I.M. Pei, he designed kind of a period space inside the pavilion, and we can find out they even showing kind of multimedia screenings on the floor of the period space. So Yang Yingfeng Yu Yang also showing one of his masterpiece Phoenix sculptures just outside of the pavilions. But in this documents sections, we are not only want to memorize this important icons work. We also try to finding some of the hidden treasure. For example, in fact, this was the original design for the Republic of China. I mean, the pavilion of the Republic of China by 4 Taiwanese students studied in United States. One of the some of the students became very famous in the future. So why this design has been canceled? Because after the competition and the open court decides this design is kind of winner at the end. After that, I.M. Pei just coming and he said he has interest into helping Republic of China to build its pavilion. So the government just said because I.M. Pei is more famous, more recognized internationally. So this young guy, you need to wait. In the future, you will have better chance. So in this document, I also want to show in kind of the original designs which has been forgot and ignored in the design history of Taiwan. But on the other side, just near the documents of the Expo 1970s, I borrowed some of the important works from Japan. For example, like the works from Kimura's Zunehisa, and Kimura's work is kind of very typical left-wing work, which shows the unsatisfied and also showing the anguish from the student movement against the Tokyo Olympic in 1964 and Osaka Expo in 1970. Because in the 1960, in fact, it's a very important peak of the student movement around the world, except Taiwan in the 1960. So in fact, the Japanese students and the young artists, they have a very different attitudes towards the expo, and also which means they have a very different attitudes towards the the Osaka Expo. And I think it's very important for the Taiwanese audience because before we usually only introduce the magnificent part of the export, but in our textbook, we are rare to introduce that. In fact, at the same time, there's a lot of artists, students, they try to against these mega constructions because, for example, until today, Osaka is still kind of seated with the hugest gap between the poorest people and the richest people. So for the students' movement joined the 1960s, they think to building the expo is kind of a very huge waste for just try to making kind of illusions for the foreigners to prove that Japan has been modernized. So in the space, we can find out that the export documents on the other room, but on these rooms, we showing the opposite students, the opposite artist group in the 1960 Japan. So they are usually kind of a left-wing opposite experimental group, and they try to showing their work on the street. For example, in the 1964, the Highway Center, they have a project called cleaning project because in the 1964, the government asking the citizen of the Tokyo city they should helping the government to cleaning the streets. So people were surprised today because in fact in the 1960s the city of the Tokyo is not so as clean as today. In fact, there's a lot of trash, especially in the downtown Tokyo until 1980s. So the artists, they wearing the white clothes like the doctor or kind of a chemist, and they're starting to cleaning on the street of the busy street of the Ginza. So their activity also became kind of arousing the people's attentions when they are going to the war. And in this biennial, we also invited the local architect group and to show their idea about the pavilion. So Office AAA is architectural studios based in Taichung, constituted by several young architects. So they also designed a very new pavilion to show their idea about Wang Dahong's novel and also what's their perspective on the pavilion. So which we can find out the pavilion combines the elements of the modernism and also the elements from the traditional vocabulary of architecture. So the third topic is talking about the Asian megacity because, as I say, the cyberpunk they always showing kind of Asian style megapolis. So So I'm interesting about how the Asian artists reflect or observing about the cities they live. So the first artist I introduced here is Li Yongzi from Taiwan. And his work, Neon Old Transition, is talking about the very old style neon signboards. Because in the 1970s and 80s, this kind of a neon signboard has been seen as kind of a symbol of the futurism, but in fact, today it became kind of a very old-fashioned and even you can say kind of a cultural heritage regarding of today's standard. Okay, so maybe I should skip some of the artists. Shopping to the from India, and his work is talking about in the future, it's kind of a dystopia world. The cleaning air and water will become a kind of the most expensive commodity in the future. So the rich middle class families, they will try to show in their richness by by planting the planets in the house or or, or luxury wasting the cleaning water. So it's also showing kind of a very strong dystopia scenes in the future. And although the topic is talking about the situation in Delhi, and if you are living in Delhi, you will suddenly have a very strong feeling about this topic. But because Taichung is one of the most air polluted city in Taiwan, so in fact the local audience they are very interesting about this work, and I can see that a lot of parents they were discussing with their children about the air pollution, and they have a very strong feelings about how the artists depict the imagined dystopia of future. And some of the artists, they are not showing the imagined future, but they showing the reality of now. For example, the Cambodian artist Lin Shok Shanina, and the photograph is taken by Lin, in fact, is today's From Pain. Although this series called From Pain 2043. And for example, this islands we saw, we call it Diamond Islands, is high developed new areas of from band, and and also they built kind of a copied Parisian streets on these islands. But in fact, this island is trying to attract the foreign investors. So there are certain people really live in this island. So you can say it's kind of a very high tech, high developed ghost town. And the reality of the From Pain's already showing kind of a dystopia, so we don't need to imagine another kind of a dystopia. And Vietnamese artist Wu Dan Tran Nguyen, his work Serpent's Tides, which use the wasted air from the motorcycles and link it into a very tall buildings. And it's also a very strong metaphor borrowed from the biblical stories, the Babel Towers, and Undan's work is always talking about how the contemporary Vietnamese deal with the air pollution. And on the one hand, the motorcycles rider became kind of an icon of Vietnam. But on the other hand, it's also kind of main resources of the air pollution. So it became kind of a very paradoxical, but also creating kind of a significant perspective on the interpretation of the Asian cities, like the Vietnamese cities, Ho Chi Minh City. Okay, so I think because the limitation of the time, this chapter will be my last chapter. The chapter which might be most related to what happens today, which about the pandemic and about the apocalypse. Apocalypse, which means the end of the world. So because the entire working process is happens during the pandemic, from the very beginning to the end of the biennial. So we are not only dealt with this situation, but we are also noticed that we have the responsibilities to interpret it, what we are going on right now. So so for these sections, we also try to encourage different artists to interpret the situation of the pandemic. And one of the most important commission work is by Taiwanese artist Josie Ho. The title called Dots. And in fact, this multi-media installation is just located at the entrance of the museum. So when the visitors entered the museums, they need to go through these pathways, and they will see a video showing girls who try to post the dots on the screens, and then they will meet space which looks just like the kind of a custom check or the passport check space in the airport. So when the visitors they want to visiting the museum, they must go through this space, and when they come near the checkpoints, they can have a chance to pick out one of the stickers from this checkpoint, and the performers in fact are performing by the real person, so it's kind of a real-time performing work. And but there's kind of a rule for the performers that the performers can't say anything, so she just can't express it by the body language. And the artists want to creating kind of space and experience which don't need to explain to explain by the language, because we are already very familiar about what we should do when we enter buildings or the public space. So so the entire idea is because during the pandemic period, when we enter the public buildings in Taiwan, so we always need to go through like the temperature check or the ID card check, this kind of checkpoints to ensure the public health. But because it's the very beginning of the pandemic, like in the 2020, people don't think this pandemic will continue for several years. And we thought it will just like the SARS in 2003. So I think most of the public institution events in the museum, they just use kind of a temporary desk, which means the desk which is not good looking, kind of an ugly desk, and they just try to oh, okay, I will speed it out. and try to ending it in a fine. And I feel it's so in 2021, I feel that if this pandemic will continue forever, maybe we should think about these facilities should be part of the building. So because this kind of idea, I starting to discussing with the artists and make this commission, and it's became kind of a very interesting tourist spot in the biennials. And of course, we also commissioned other artists to talking about the apocalypse. For example, Hutikos, it's an artist group from Taiwan. They try to show in the facilities for the people to survive after the ecological apocalypse. And the Korean artist Kim Na-young's work is talking about the underwater lab in Korea, and because in his video talking about in the future the most people has been passed away during the pandemic, so the real people survive. They hidings in the underwater lab to developing the technology in the future. And the work from Japanese artist Yuko Mori, her work is directly talking about the experience of a quarantine. So she used the sound which recording during the quarantine period and transformed this sound into the kind of digital signals, and use these signals to play the pianos by kind of automatic programs. So it became kind of a transforming to showing her personal experience during the quarantine. So I think because we already reached the limitation of the time, although we still have a lot of slideshow, but maybe we can stop here and we have enough time to going into the Q&A stage of today's speech. Okay, so I think Sobin, you can take over and I can drink a water.
Thank you very much, Nobuo. I think there are a lot of slides actually. In fact, I think it's more than 80 over pages actually. Perhaps let's give a warm thank you to Takamori-san, everyone. I think it's good to have listen to part of the a very complex Biennale theme that you have actually worked together with your curatorial colleagues. And I would like to shout out to two of them who are here today, Tanavi from Thailand and Anusha from India. They are actually in the audience. So it will be good also if they can just say hi to Tanavi and Anusha, and hopefully they could also chip in later just to help out with Nobuo. I think Nobuo is losing his voice right now. Yeah, but it is a very important, in a sense, a lecture. I think is quite complex. You're bringing in, I think, a critique firstly of the progressive narrative perpetuated in true techno-modernization, especially coming from a Western modernity, and also in a way also looking at how Asian artists or culture or the intelligentsia in the past in a way have adapted the kind of a modern or modernistic imagination that part of the logic of progress is to come into conflict with other civilization and other culture. And you pointed out in the Ishigara and Chin and the book by Chin and I lost my notes as well, and Wang in Unrestricted Warfare. So it's interesting that in a way that you guys talking about how artists could offer us, or how artists and architects could offer a different way of imagination, a different alternative. So this is the gist that I want to sort of like bring up first among the 6 different themes that you actually develop together for the Biennale. So I would also like to invite all the audience, okay? So if you have any question, yeah, please raise your hand in the group chat, okay? Or you can also post it in the chat box so that I can read it out and also bring this into discussion with Nobuo, some of the things that you're interested in. All right. I think perhaps I can kickstart with one of the questions which has been collected by the INSO team prior to this session is that what does future really means to Southeast Asian societies and culture? Maybe it has been touched upon in Nobuo's lecture, but could you actually, sort of like find a different way to just what are your comments or remarks, and what do you feel? What does future really mean to Southeast Asian society and culture, or even the other people that you have come across or in your discussion, with your colleagues? What does it mean, and how do we see that? Okay, Nobuo?
I think I have been mentioning about the Western perspective, which focusing on the technology modernizations. And I think for the Southeast Asia, we should escaping from this technology modernization. For example, Tanavi has been invited artist or the film director from Laos, and we showing her work, long workings in the biennial. And I think that film is very interesting because it's talking about the future of law. I mean, especially law in the countryside. And in the future, the countryside is still countryside. But we can feel that there's more technology has been applied even in the countryside. And in the very far away background, we can see the skyscrapers in the modern cities. But the people living in the countryside is still suffering the same problems which already generated from now, and it will continue pace to the next generation. So I think to escaping from the techno modernization is also providing us that we can have the different imagination about the future, and we can escaping from the mythologies of the technologies. Now the technology will conquer everything, but in fact the problem still existing. So I think that's as the Southeast Asians, because I also think if you allow, I could be part of the Southeast Asian, and we should think about this kind of a future, which is very different, not only compared to Western world, but even compared to Japan or China.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in that sense, it's actually a shared global scale issues that we're talking about climate change, dealing with the global supply chain issues. Okay, the issue that's experienced in a locality and how it can actually be implicated and actually connected with other places, and then we can be experienced that during the pandemic, as well as all the recent issues that dealing with export, import, transportation, data sharing, and whatnot. So I wonder, can you point out like some interesting work in a sense that also deal with this? Because I think the Laotian artists you talked about here that Tanavi have brought in certainly deals with the issue of pandemic and apocalypse, as well as the issues of Asian mega cities. How does it reflect and how does it critique, okay, the kind of techno modernization that I would say Asian technocrats is also perpetuating and imagining and adapting from all the logic of neo-capitalist modernity.
I think I would like to provide my personal perspective or observation, especially after the finish of the biennial. I can feel that a lot of Asian artists across the countries, they are very interested about the environments they have been live. And for example, so there's a lot of artists, they are very awareness about the city environment, but somehow they also provide kind of very negative feelings, or even when they think about the future of the Asian cities, they have kind of a more strong dystopia feelings. And compared to the first generation of the modernism artists like Liu Guosong or Wang Dahong, you can feel they have a more positive feeling about the future. So I think this element is very crucial, and I can't say it's the negative or positive, which is good or not. But somehow we can say the artists, they are very honest to face the realities. For example, it's like the pollutions, the environment issues, or the overdeveloping issues, and even some of the artists, they are the victim. For example, Lin from Cambodia himself is the victim of the city regenerations. His family house has been forced to push out because the governments want to developing kind of the future. So the term futures in Cambodia became kind of a very negative term, because every time when some politician is talking about future, we will say, come on, not against, not future against. We just want to focus what we have and don't take over what we have. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting in a sense that the actual experience by the artist actually brings in a more emotive as well as driving the conceptual operation of Lim Sotalina in a sense. I think I would agree, because that will, if you actually go to the actual site of the whole road that leads towards Siem Reap and it connected to Bangkok, you can see how nation and state imagination, all right, overrule or overpowered the actual livelihood of the people. Here, there's one question here, but by Daniel Chong, and if I can direct that to Nobuo, and if I may read this. Any comment on the future of internet? Okay, in Asia in general, I suppose it would be interesting. What do you or other curators, or maybe if you have discussed about this before, I think, which is very interesting, because the last 2 years we also see the emergence of cryptocurrency and how it actually brings in the blockchain itself, bringing a different dimension of making art visible to a different type of audience, different type of collectors, especially with NFTs, and also thinking about metaverse spaces. I think that would be interesting. Perhaps you can also bring in some of the work that you think could address both the blockchain, NFTs, or even the phenomena of the metaverse.
I think I have no comment about NFT or metaverse because it's not yet happened, so they are just growing up. But for the Internet of Asia, so I think I'm very positive to looking at on it, because, for example, we are already virtual meeting here, and but there are still a lot of dangerous in the I mean, not dangerous, but kind of a challenge in the Asian internet platforms. For example, in a lot of countries, they still have censorship on the internet. So I think that's something we should talking about. We should like open a book to talking about it in the future. But on the other hand, if we want to talk about the work which reflects to the internet, I would like to talking about to introduce work from the Malaysian artist Kang Xiong King. King, in fact, his work is not directly about the internet, but his work is more. Maybe I can just show it. The slideshows. jump lots. Yeah, and his work is talking about the amplifiers, which is a vintage technologies, but use very humorous and interesting ways to talking about the idea and the concept, technical rates about the amplifier, and with Malaysian's engineer Nick Shazwan. So I think this work is very interesting because it's related about the industry in Malaysia and how the Malaysia puts its own industries in the globalized era, and it also reflects the concept of the mechanical and also the technical details. So I don't think I'm not sure it's really reflect about the questions of the internet, but somehow I feel it has a very strong connection between these two bodies.
Well, I do think, I mean, if I may comment, I think Gan Cheng-King in his a lot of the research, in a sense, or his accumulation of visual, beside the things that he collected, I think in real life that he referred to when he does his painting. But I think Gans actually refer to a lot of images that he actually collected online, and we can definitely see that if you look at it in details, you know, the kind of appropriation, juxtaposing of the internet culture that actually he draws from, you know, in his work. And you can and I've actually also shared with you with the audience site the Gan's website, so you can actually visit his website and find some of the work there. Okay, so there's one more question here. I think it's somehow related as well. From Sing Choi. Will the use of a 3D program give more impact in the current art scene? Perhaps Nobu, was there actually artists who utilize 3D program or CG or even AI, for example, or GAN generated images in the show that you have brought in, or maybe in the future?
I think absolutely. I think the most strong impact is from the VR and also the 3D printer. For example, in this biennial, we have Korean artists that use 3D printers to making the objects. And this afternoon, I just visit exhibitions which the sculpture are all made by the 3D printings. And I can feel that when the sculptor is starting to use the 3D printings, the idea about the space and also the materialize the object is very different. And from my view of the points, that it's not only transforms the shape of the art object, but it also change how the artists generated their work. Yeah, but I think it's already happening now. It's not about future. Yeah, maybe in the future something will more progressive. The people just need to think, and things just starting to generate it. And I think recently a lot of people, they are playing the AI program to painting something on the internet, and it's became a very popular activity just in this month. Yeah.
Yes, I think yeah, there are a lot of, but maybe how could, if I can actually connect this to one of the sub themes in this section that you haven't touched on, right? How could artists work with, or that you notice, right? Using technology or not, or to critique or to question, how can they queer, right, science fiction? How do we queer science fiction in that sense? To queer science fiction in the sense, in queering science fiction as in like destabilizing the idea of patriarchal or a very male dominant ways of thinking about science fiction and modernity. Okay, perhaps we can bring that, and we could maybe also connect this to the question by Sun Hui Lam, any thoughts on the role of the mystical in the future? Okay, so there are two questions here. Querying science fiction, which is in the show, and perhaps this could be linked to mystical in the future. How do we think about mystical, right, or mysterious,
Okay.
the mysterious in the future?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts of our futurism exhibition is that we also including a discussion of queer, and because one of our curators, Ho Yu Kwang, he mainly charged these sections, and he find out that especially in Asia, the early cured novels or films or even bonus films, they are highly related with the sci-fi backgrounds because the sci-fi imagination somehow they provide kind of a very broad space for the genders, the bodies, because in the sci-fi world, that's even we can change our gender, we can change our bodies, and we can become kind of a programming or something. So the sexualities, the body experience could be changed into a very different dynamic stage. So according to that ideas, we think it's very important that we should also providing the perspective about the queer. And one of the most interesting things is that, in fact, in the early 2000s, in Taiwanese contemporary arts, a lot of important work, which also showing kind of a queer subject and also providing a very sci-fi atmosphere on the other on the same time. So we also try to introduce kind of a vintage words from the early 2000s. And to answer the question about the mystical future, I think the future which created by Asian people were always mystical because our cultures always welcomes including something mystical, something combined with the regional experience, and that's something that we will not give up, even under the environment and materials background of the high tech. So I think, for example, in Taiwan, if we want the computers to function, and we want to avoid any chaotic technical problems, we will put a snake which called Guai Guai, and we always put the green package on the computer, and that's kind of very mystical shamanism methods to deal with the computers. So even Taiwan is kind of a high-tech hub, but the people are widely accept it, not only by the general people, but for the engineers, they are the deepest believer about this ritual. Yeah, so I think it could be replies your question.
Noble, is there any artist that you can point towards that in the show itself, in the Biennale, that actually the work actually reflect the influence or the so-called being informed by this kind of practice?
You mean the informed of the shamanism, or?
Yes, that, for example.
Yeah, I think this artist, but I didn't edited her work in the slideshows. The Catalina Africa, which selected by Tessa Maria Cazons. I think her work is very interesting because, in fact, her perspective on the future is more positive, and her work is contain a lot of shamanism practices to showing a more harmonious future with a lot of love. So I think it's on the one hand, you can feel a lot of the male artists, they are unsatisfied, they showing the dystopia, the damage of the nature or urban environment. But on the other hand, I can feel lots somehow the female artists in these biennials, they showing more mystical or more spiritual route to guide us that in the future it's another possibility.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to bring everyone's attention, actually Tanavi has already replied to the question by Daniel to Nobuo in regards to the issue of NFT. So the topic of NFTs and metaverse are included in the reader, Midnight Sun and the Owl. Perhaps that's why Nobuo doesn't want to reveal too much, because this is a teaser, everyone. And this reader that is actually part of Tanavi's section of this exhibition, which is the biennial publication and part of the curatorial works in the non-exhibition format. Okay, so it is coming out in a few months' time. Perhaps maybe this is good also for a few more questions I can ask as well. But could you, Noble, can you actually tell us about something special about this exhibition format that you have worked together with Tanavi and Anusha? There's a lot of online materials. Where can we get them? How can the audience look for them? Besides the e-publication coming up.
Yeah, I think the most challenge we face is because the working process is just under the pandemic. So I decided to invite the colleagues from the different nations. I think each one of them I have been cooperated with them before, but it's the first time we constitute together. And each of us has different missions. For example, Tanavi is still working very hard to editing the readers because we want the discussion is not only stop when the finish of the close of the exhibitions. We should also extending more academic discussions in the future. And another important example is that Anushka curated the video art section, and the video art section is not only happens in the exhibition, but we also provide online platforms. And most important is that we invited Indian artist group to creating independent video streams on the internet, but it's close same time as the exhibition, but during the period of the exhibition, the people can just freely to access the internet platform to see all the video curated by Anushka. Yeah, so we try to creating different kind of the possibility to showing the potential of this biennial. I know it's a very challenging, very difficult because the one reality and factor is not only about the pandemic, but also about the isolated political situation of Taiwan. So the information from Taiwan is always more easy to be ignored by the international art scenes. That's another factor we face it, but I am very thankful for our international colleagues because they are all working very hard to promoting these projects by their different networkings in different countries. So I think although maybe the mainstream are things in the Western world didn't discussing about our project, but I can feel in Thailand, in India, or even in Turkey, there are several Asian countries they are interested about the projects we done in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the last question, Novo. Yeah, this is actually sent to me from the INSO team here. Audience actually PM the questions, and I think this will be interesting because this connects back to your projection, your trajectory as an independent curator. You have done a lot of research for the last 10 years, going to different places and also researching, meeting artists, meeting curators, also developing a certain understanding and theme, okay, to be able to come to this point. And of course, before this, you have done a lot of different exhibitions as well, right? But I think this comes from a perspective of a contemporary artist, and the artist asks, do you have any suggestion for young contemporary artists nowadays? Okay, there always seems to be a struggle between delivering complex work and getting the messages across to the public. So I think that's why I read it in the way, how can I relate to you, is that you have amassed a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, but how do we deliver that? How do we make that interesting? And especially for young artists, perhaps the challenge is the efficacy of conveying a clear message or problematizing, especially like a complex exhibition like that. How do you work with artists? How do you work with your curators? What are your advice, or in that sense?
I think from my individual perspective, I can't say I can provide suggestion for the young artists. In fact, I need to learn from a young artist, because somehow I feel a lot of young artists, they have a more dynamic, more flexible ways to deal with the society today, especially for the communities from the young generation. Because as we discussed it in before these forums, that we said only the old generation use the Facebook, but the young generation, they already use TikTok, Instagram, they have different channels. So I think the most important part is that you should find out what kind of a channel, what kind of a methodology is the most flexible or most suitable for your expressions, and that's the most important fundamentals parts of your creation. And based on it, you can start into exploring into different borders, across the border to the different community or different generation or different countries. But the most important is that you should realize and you should clearly understanding what is your most important benefits compared to the older generations, which we already are. Yeah. So that's my last comment.
Oh my God. You're feeling old. I think that is an interesting idea in the sense.
I feel very old now.
But I think that is precisely what your theme, Phantasma Polis, actually makes people think, because we are talking about an intersection of old, new, future, past, okay, imagine and factual in the sense, what exactly is time, what exactly is age, what exactly is complexity and simplicity or clarity of messages. And I think it's a flip of coin that you see something. I think in answer to the question as well, that what seems to be very simple, sending across, but yet a lot of things is actually hidden behind. And I think that is why some of the things that Nobu and Tim actually try to bring out in talking about Asia Sci-Fi, the Cosmos, for example, the things that we don't pay attention, that we have forgotten, right? The complexity of things. There needs to be a certain channel to bring it out, to be able to expose that, to probe that, and to be able to talk about that. So thank you very much to Nobu. Before I think we really get to the conclusion, I think my part is in concluding is that again, the presentation on Phantasma Polis and happening at the Asian Art Biennial in Womei-Guan Taichung National Museum of Art, which is very interesting. As I say, it's like a typical, it's not the capital, but yet it's the heart of, in a sense, of a certain industrialization and production, I think, of agriculture, for example, all related in Taiwan, especially the island of Taiwan, right? And yet you are able to, in a sense, bring in very complex issues, historical or future, together with your colleagues from from different parts of Asia to deal with that. So, and questioning, critiquing this so-called the logic of progressive narrative in techno-modernization, techno-orientalism, perpetuated or represented by Hollywood visual cultural products, as well as artistic or documentary work. Okay, and I think this really have to be a question that we ourselves also have to ask, how we are being conditioned and also being perpetuated by this kind of images that we see and that we consume. But yet at the same time, I think bringing in like Daniel's question, bringing in Sunhui's question, right? But how about NFT? How about metaverse? How do we deal with them? The idea of mysticism or mystic, all right, could be interesting as well, because I think that I don't get to ask that because I'm aware that Nobuo has also worked with the indigenous community in Taiwan in the past in some TV production program where you have visited them. I think the topic of indigenous futurism could be also, there's a lot to learn from the indigenous community in that sense. All right, and I think this would also echo to the communities in Southeast Asia and other parts, right? So, Nobuo, any last word before I really go to the closing notes from the organizer?
I just want to thank everybody who attends today the magazine. Thanks you.
Okay, all right, thank you, Nobuo. So, please thank you, everyone. Give a warm thank you to Nobuo, and so thank you very much for joining us.